I hadn't spoken to my mother in over a month, and when I finally did, it was only because she texted me. Dinner at Marcellino's this Friday at 7. It's your father's 60th. Just so you know, we're all paying for ourselves, and it's not cheap. Don't feel pressured. I read it twice, then a third time. She didn't mean to offend me, at least not directly. But that last line? Don't feel pressured. That wasn't concern. That was code. Her way of saying, we know your life didn't turn out like the rest of ours. If you can't afford to show up, better not embarrass yourself trying.
Classic mom.
5 years ago, I dropped out of college to build a tech startup. Not the most popular move in a family full of engineers, nurses, and lawyers. I remember the phone call when I told her. It started with silence and ended with her calling me irresponsible and a disappointment. Since then, our conversations were strained.
Short. Shallow.
She always managed to slip in little reminders of my failures, and always under the guise of helpful concern. But here's the thing. She didn't know what I'd built. She didn't know what I'd become. And she definitely didn't know that 3 months ago, I became the majority stakeholder in Marcellino's, the same 5-star, no reservation, ultra-exclusive restaurant where she was about to host my dad's birthday dinner. I didn't inherit the wealth. I didn't win the lottery. I worked 80-hour weeks in borrowed office spaces, ate noodles 4 nights a week, and reinvested every dollar I made back into my dream. For the first 2 years, I made less than a barista. But by year 3, I'd started closing real deals. And by year 4, I was running a software company that had grown into a quiet empire, the kind where you don't have to be loud about success, because success walks into the room before you do. I never told my family, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted them to see me, really see me without the filter of money. This dinner? This was the perfect opportunity. And I nearly didn't go. For a full day, I debated. I wrote out excuses in my notes app. I even almost texted my sister to say I couldn't make it. But something about Mom's message, that don't feel pressured, struck a chord. I didn't want revenge. But I did want to remind them that people grow in silence. That not every success story comes in a suit and tie with a neat little bow. So I texted back. Wouldn't miss it. Friday came. I left work early. Not that anyone tells me when to leave anymore. I'm the CEO. I got dressed in a tailored navy suit, subtle and clean. A watch that said class without shouting money. Simple cufflinks. Fresh shave. A good scent. Confident, not cocky. I arrived at Marcellino's 15 minutes early. The facade was as stunning as ever. Black marble, brass trim, understated signage. The kind of place that whispered luxury. A valet stepped forward before I even finished closing my car door. Inside, the scent of aged wood, rosemary, and slow-roasted meats hit me like memory and ambition had a baby. The lighting was soft. The music, a quiet jazz ensemble playing just behind the bar. And standing at the host's stand was Antonio, tall, immaculately dressed, with that old-school charm that makes you feel like royalty. His eyes met mine. He smiled immediately. Mr. Carter, a pleasure to see you again. I returned the smile. Evening, Antonio. He leaned in slightly. Would you like the usual protocol, sir, or shall we keep things discreet this evening?
Discreet for now.
Discreet, I nodded. Let's not make a scene. He gave a slight bow. Your family has arrived. The Amber Room, as requested. He led me through the main dining hall, past walls lined with rare vintages and original art. The Amber Room was semi-private, oval booth, gold-trimmed chairs, warm candlelight. They were all there. My father, looking older but content. My sister, her boyfriend, 2 cousins, and of course, Mom, in her best pearl earrings and that look she always wore when she felt in control. Until she saw me. Her eyebrows lifted a fraction. You made it, she said, like she'd just seen a ghost walk in wearing a Rolex. I smiled as I sat down. Of course I did. She leaned in, voice hushed. Just a reminder, everyone's covering their own plate. This place isn't exactly affordable. I looked at her calmly. I know. She tilted her head slightly, confused. Maybe even concerned. I wasn't supposed to sound this confident. I wasn't supposed to look this put together. That was the first crack. Hey, quick pause. If this story's got you hooked, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube or reading on a platform. We've got 6 more chapters ahead, and trust me, the reveal? It's worth sticking around for. Alright, back to the story. We ordered appetizers. Mom complained about the prices. My cousin whispered that he'd never even heard of most of the ingredients. My sister's boyfriend, trying too hard, asked if the Wagyu came with fries. The waiter remained graceful because I trained the staff myself. Well, trained the general manager, who trained the rest. But still, every movement, every word from the staff was a ballet of excellence. That's what I paid for. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, Antonio caught my eye again. "Mr. Carter, if I may," he gestured toward the wine cellar. We stepped inside, away from the noise. The chef wanted to confirm, "Shall we bring out the birthday dessert with your note, as planned?" I smiled.
Yes.
And the bottles? Already decanted. The Reserve Cabernet and the Louis XIII will be presented personally. I nodded. Perfect. As I stepped back toward the table, something shifted. The energy. My mother was glancing around, confused. Dad looked puzzled too. Then Antonio arrived, flanked by 2 senior staff. He placed a rare bottle of red wine on the table. "Compliments of the house," he said. Then he turned toward me. "Mr. Carter, would you care to make the toast?" The silence was thunderous. Mom blinked. "Wait, what did he call you?" I stood slowly.
Cleared my throat.
Raised the glass. "To Dad," I said. "To 60 years of lessons, hard work, and sacrifice. And to the future. One where I hope we see each other a little clearer." I smiled at him. He looked stunned. "Happy birthday, Dad." We clinked glasses. No one spoke for a moment. Then Mom asked the question, "You know the manager?" I looked at her, then calmly replied, "I own Marcellino's." The silence tasted better than the wine. The moment I said it, "I own Marcellino's," the table fell into a stunned, reverent silence. Not a dramatic gasp. Not a flurry of questions. Just silence. The kind that only happens when the walls people built in their minds suddenly start to crack. I didn't say it arrogantly. I didn't shout it. I just said it with the same calm I'd learned over the years, the kind that comes when you no longer need to prove anything. I sat down and sipped my wine. The bottle? A 2005 Chateau Margaux. I'd had it sent from the cellar specifically for this evening. My father held his glass gently, like it was fragile.
He was the first to speak.
"You own this place?" I nodded. "Through a holding group, yes. I acquired majority stake earlier this year." He blinked slowly. "Why didn't you say anything?" There it was, not judgment, not anger, just quiet curiosity. "I didn't think it would matter," I replied. And that was true. I never wanted their respect because of my title or net worth. I wanted it because I was still their son, their brother, their family, with or without the trappings of success. But I had to admit, a small part of me enjoyed the irony. 5 years ago, I was the failure. The one who couldn't finish school, who burned bridges, who dared to take risks with no promise of a reward. Now, I owned the building they were eating in, and they'd almost excluded me from the dinner. I didn't bring it up. I didn't have to. My mother, though, wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned forward, her voice a carefully balanced mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "You mean you bought stock? Or you actually own Marcellino's?" I kept my tone gentle. "I'm one of 3 majority stakeholders. My firm oversees the operational strategy and long-term expansion. I work closely with the executive chef and the general manager. That wine you're drinking? I approved the purchase last month." Her lips parted as if to say something, then closed again. She looked like someone who had just learned the earth was round after years of believing it was flat. My sister, Julia, leaned in, her eyes wide. "Wait, so you've been running some kind of business all this time? I thought your startup folded." I smiled. It didn't fold. It pivoted.
Twice, actually.
Now it's profitable and I run 3 ventures under one holding umbrella. "What does that mean?" her boyfriend asked, clearly out of his depth. It means, I said, that I work with tech firms, hospitality groups, and real estate developers. And I try to make smart decisions quietly. He nodded slowly, then whispered to Julia, "So, he's like a CEO or something?" Julia answered for me, "He is a CEO." My dad chuckled, just once, but it was genuine. I'll be damned. I looked over at him. "You worked hard all your life," I said. "That's what I watched growing up. You built things with your hands. I just built something different." He raised his glass again.
To building.
Everyone followed suit, but Mom hesitated. Finally, she clinked her glass, but not without a comment. "Well," she said, "I guess you really surprised us." The rest of the dinner played out like a slow-motion unraveling of years of assumptions. My mother asked questions with thinly veiled suspicion, but the more I answered, the more she ran out of room to doubt. My cousins were floored. They started asking about the business, about how I got into investing, about how I managed to stay under the radar. I told them some of it, carefully. How I lived in a cramped studio for 2 years. How I walked dogs and did odd freelance jobs while building my first product. How I crashed my credit twice and ate peanut butter sandwiches every night to stretch my rent money. They listened. For the first time in years, they really listened. I kept it measured. I didn't flaunt. I didn't give them the full spreadsheet of numbers or assets under management. But I gave them just enough to change the narrative they'd written about me. Dessert arrived shortly after, not from the regular menu. It was a custom creation from the head pastry chef. Dark chocolate mousse with bourbon-glazed cherries and a tiny edible plaque that read, "Happy 60th, Mr. Carter, from all of us." I didn't have to explain it. The staff did. With sincerity. With warmth. And my dad? His eyes glossed over as he read it. "You arranged this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Of course. You deserve something special." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. We lingered at the table long after the plates were cleared. A manager brought out 2 bottles of Louis XIII cognac. One for the table. One in a gift box, handed directly to my father. A gift. From the owner. No one spoke. Even my mother couldn't muster a critique. Eventually, as the night drew to a close and everyone began saying their goodbyes, Julia pulled me aside. "You know," she said, "Mom had told us you probably wouldn't come." I nodded. "Yeah, I figured." "She didn't mean it to be cruel," she added. "She just thought you'd be embarrassed." I smiled gently. She thought wrong. Julia hesitated, then hugged me. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Thanks," I said quietly. Then Mom approached. She looked at me for a long time. "You really did all this?" I nodded. She exhaled sharply through her nose.
"Well."
I was wrong. That's all she said. But from her, that was a full confession. After they left, I stayed behind for a few minutes. Antonio returned. "Everything to your satisfaction, sir?" "Perfect," I said. "Thank you." He nodded. "Your father looked proud." I paused. "Yeah," I said. That meant a lot. As I walked out, the valet brought my car up. Before I slid into the seat, I looked back at the entrance of the restaurant. This place was more than a business. It was a symbol of perseverance, of silent growth, of everything I'd built while the people I loved thought I was failing. Later that night, back at my place, I poured myself a final glass of wine and sat on the balcony, city lights stretching out around me like a living painting. I wasn't angry at my mother. Not anymore. She grew up in survival mode. Her rules came from fear, not malice. But I had to make peace with something. Some people will only believe in you after the world forces them to. And that's okay. Because I never needed their permission to succeed. I just needed to keep going. Success, as it turns out, is invisible for a long, long time. Not just to others, but sometimes even to yourself. After the dinner, after the quiet nods of respect and the hesitant congratulations, I returned home that night feeling both full and strangely empty. The truth was, I had achieved something I once thought impossible. I had sat across from the same people who doubted me, not to prove them wrong, but to simply exist in front of them as my unfiltered self. But that version of me, the one who quietly signed checks and owned fine wine cellars, hadn't always existed. There was a time when I couldn't afford to buy gas without checking my balance first. A time when failure wasn't a theoretical risk, it was my daily reality. And they never saw that version of me. No one did. I remember the first night I slept in my office, not because I was too busy, but because I had nowhere else to go. I was 24, had just dropped out of college, and used what little savings I had to register an LLC for my software idea. My roommate at the time moved out and sublet our apartment, without telling me. When I got home one night, the locks were changed. I didn't call my family. I didn't want to hear, "We told you so." So I went in my office, and by office, I mean the corner of a co-working space with leaky windows and flickering lights, and curled up under my desk with my backpack as a pillow. That was the start. For the next 18 months, my life was a blur of caffeine, rejection, debugging, and debt. I pitched my idea, a small business automation platform, to 47 investors. I got told no 44 times. The other 3 didn't respond. So I stopped pitching. I built instead. Line by line. Feature by feature. I watched YouTube tutorials on backend scaling while eating dollar ramen. I watched my laptop overheat more than once. I lived in fear of a hard drive crash. But I kept building. Eventually, I found a beta client, a friend of a friend who owned a digital design agency and needed a better system to track client invoices and automations. I offered him a lifetime deal for $400.
He said yes.
That $400 paid my rent for the next month. Not a home, but a proper office. A small room with a door and a key and space for a used futon. I called it Progress. I had a whiteboard, one of those cheap ones from a clearance sale at Staples. On it, I wrote just 4 words in black marker. Show them you were right. I wasn't writing it for the investors or the strangers online. I was writing it for my family, for my mother, for the moments when she'd say, "Why can't you just be normal?" For the time she told me, "You can't live on dreams." Every morning, I'd see that board. And every night, I'd fall asleep under it. The first real turning point came in year 2. I was working 16 hours a day when I met Layla, a UX designer who'd just left her job at a major firm. She loved the concept I'd been building, and after 3 weeks of talking, I convinced her to join me. Not for a salary, I couldn't afford her, but for equity. She became my co-founder, and she changed everything. Where I saw features, she saw user flow. Where I saw problems, she saw design. Together, we rebuilt the entire platform in 6 months. When we relaunched, we signed 7 clients in the first month, then 22 in the next. And by the end of that quarter, we had our first 5-figure month. I cried. Quietly. Alone. But I cried. Because for the first time in 2 years, the work was starting to speak louder than the doubt. Still, I never told my family. Not because I was being secretive, but because the gap between our worlds had grown too wide. They spoke in terms of salaries and promotions. I spoke in terms of burn rate, acquisition cost, and churn. When they asked how I was doing, I just said, "Still figuring things out." I could have told them that we landed a 6-figure licensing deal with a retail software chain. I could have said that our first angel investor came through and we opened an office downtown. I could have shown them the front page TechCrunch feature. But I didn't. Because part of me still remembered that first message from Mom. Don't feel pressured. It lingered. It meant, we don't expect much from you anymore. So, I stopped expecting much from them. 2. We grew. By year 3, we had 15 employees. By year 4, we had 43. That's when I spun off the first side venture, an AI-based menu analytics tool for restaurants. It started as a joke, really. One of our clients, a restaurant group, complained about how hard it was to track dish profitability. We built a prototype in 2 weeks. They loved it. They told friends. Soon, we had a second company under our belt. I gave Layla equity in both, promoted a few early team members, and started taking founder salary for the first time. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay off the credit cards I'd maxed out years earlier. And then the opportunity came. Marcelino's. I'd gone there once, Years earlier, during restaurant week when prices dropped low enough for normal people to afford a three-course meal. I remembered the elegance, the hush, the way the staff moved with silent precision. So when one of my restaurant clients mentioned that the group owning Marcelino's was looking for new capital to fund an expansion, I raised my hand. Not loudly, quietly. Through my holding company, I negotiated a majority buy-in under strict confidentiality. I didn't want headlines. I didn't want to flaunt. I just wanted to own something that once felt unreachable. And when the paperwork cleared and I stepped into that boardroom as a partner, I thought of that whiteboard, the one with 4 words. Show them you were right. I took it off the wall that day, not because I no longer needed it, but because I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone but myself. Back in the present, a few days after the dinner, my dad called me. Unusual to say the least. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hey, I said. Hey, he replied.
Pause.
That was something. I smiled into the phone.
Yeah, it was.
He cleared his throat. Your mom's been quiet all weekend. Is that a good thing? She's thinking. I waited. She asked me if I'd known. About the business. About everything. And what did you say? He chuckled softly. Told her I hadn't. That you never said much. Just said you were trying your best. Another pause. I'm proud of you, son. There it was. Not shouted.
Not forced.
Just said.
Plain. Honest.
Thanks, Dad, I replied. That means more than you know. Later that night, I passed the whiteboard again, now leaning against the wall in my home office. I picked it up and turned it over. On the back, in the faded black ink of an old dry erase marker, were words I didn't even remember writing. One day, they'll ask how you did it. I stared at those words for a long time, and for the first time in years, I whispered back. They don't have to ask anymore. People talk about success like it's a staircase, a series of calculated, upward steps. But if you've ever actually built anything from scratch, you know the truth. Success is a staircase on fire, with half the steps missing and the top always moving. And sometimes you take a step forward, right into betrayal. The first yes. Before there were offices, restaurant acquisitions, and polished investor decks, there was one person who believed in me when no one else did. Marcus Kane. We met in a startup incubator. Not a fancy one. This was a glorified storage unit with white boards, half-broken desks, and a fridge that smelled like despair. I was working on early prototypes of my automation platform. Marcus had a fitness app he couldn't get off the ground. He was loud, charismatic, and sharp, the kind of guy who could sell a used umbrella in the middle of summer. We hit it off quickly. While most people treated the incubator like a resume booster, we stayed late. Shared meals. Traded feedback. One night, over lukewarm takeout, he said, "Your product's actually solid. You just need someone to believe in it." I didn't answer.
I was used to skepticism by then.
But the next week, he wired me $12,000. No term sheet. No contracts. Just a one-line email. Build something real. I believe in you.
I did.
That money bought me 2 months of runway. It covered hosting, a better laptop, and the first contractor I ever hired, a quiet front-end dev from Serbia named Elena, who coded faster than I could think. We launched our MVP within 6 weeks. And when I landed my first paying client, I called Marcus immediately. He picked up on the first ring. You built it?
Yep.
And someone's paying for it. He didn't say anything at first. Then he laughed hard. I knew it, he said. Let me know when you're raising for real. I want in. I promised he'd be the first call. And he was. The raise. About a year later, with a growing client base and consistent monthly revenue, we started putting together a small seed round. Not a huge one, just enough to hire a small team, pay off some debt, and stop pretending that instant ramen was a food group. Marcus was the first investor on the cap table. $50,000 for 6%. I gave him generous terms, not just out of gratitude, but because I believed in loyalty. He had taken a chance when no one else had, and in return, I wanted him to win big if we made it. He introduced me to other angel investors. He vouched for me in rooms I never could have entered alone. When we landed a SaaS showcase spot at a major tech conference, he paid for our booth personally. We were building something. Together. Or so I thought. The shift. About 9 months after the raise, the cracks began to show. Marcus started showing up to our offices unannounced. Sitting in on meetings he wasn't invited to. Giving suggestions to the product team without checking with me first. At first, I chalked it up to enthusiasm. But then he started doing something worse. Talking about the company, like it was his. At a local networking event, I overheard him say to a group of investors, "My dev team just hit 20,000 monthly users. We're planning to acquire a couple competitors next year." His dev team? His acquisition plans? I confronted him. His response was a shrug. "Relax, man. It's positioning. Investors want to see confident leadership." "But you're not leading the company, Marcus," I said. "I am." He laughed. "Does it matter? We're all on the same team." That was the moment I knew things would fall apart. Because Marcus didn't understand boundaries. He thought investment was ownership in the truest sense, not just of equity, but of identity. And slowly, he began undermining me. He'd call my lead engineer late at night with quick fixes. He criticized decisions in front of junior staff. He even tried to bring in a senior advisor to help guide the company, a man with a track record of gutting startups for parts and flipping them for a quick profit. That's when I knew Marcus didn't love the company. He loved the idea of owning the win. After weeks of tension, I called for a private meeting. Just me and him. Neutral ground, a rooftop lounge we used to hang out in when we were nobodies. I laid it all out. "You're crossing lines," I said. "You're not on payroll, not on the board, and you're creating confusion in the team." He leaned back in his chair. "I built this with you." "You helped," I said. "And I'll always respect that. But this isn't your company. You didn't stay up for 72-hour sprints or field support tickets at 2 a.m. I did." He scoffed. "So, what? You're kicking me out?"
No.
"I'm offering you a buyout." He froze. "I'll give you $300,000 for your equity," I said. "Clean exit. No drama." Silence. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "You're buying me out," he said. "After everything I did for you?" I nodded. "It's more than fair." He stood up. Didn't say another word. Just walked away. 3 days later, I received a letter from his lawyer. Marcus was threatening legal action. He claimed I violated verbal agreements, that I'd used his intellectual contributions without attribution, that he was owed a board seat. It was baseless, but dangerous, because we didn't have airtight contracts from the early days. We had trust, and now that trust was weaponized against me. I spent $24,000 on legal fees in a month, time I should have spent building, growing, leading. We finally settled out of court. I paid him $250,000 and gave him a clause that barred him from interfering with operations or contacting the team ever again. When the wire cleared, I felt more relief than rage. But I also felt heartbreak, because Marcus had been the first person who believed in me, and the first to try and tear me down when I didn't let him take credit. What I learned: some of the hardest lessons in business don't come from your enemies. They come from your allies. The ones who helped you up just so they could stand on your shoulders. And I learned this. Not everyone who claps for you wants you to win. Some are just waiting for their chance to claim your success as their own. So I got smarter. Tighter contracts. Cleaner equity. A clear boundary between help and control. And I stopped romanticizing loyalty when it wasn't mutual. Years later, I saw Marcus again. Not in person, on LinkedIn. He posted a photo of himself at some startup mixer, holding a mic, captioned, "Helping the next generation of founders avoid the mistakes I made investing in a company that forgot where it came from." He didn't mention my name. He didn't have to. I smiled, because by then, I owned 6 ventures. We'd crossed 8 figures in revenue, and I was speaking at the same conference where we once shared a cheap booth with printed flyers and hope. I didn't hate him. I just understood him now. Some people only know how to be your friend when you need them. not when you succeed. And that's okay, because I'd already learned the most important lesson of all. A foundation built on guilt or obligation always crumbles. But one built on discipline, on truth, on clarity, that stands forever. Everyone sees the moment you win. Few ever see the moments you wait. And even fewer see the ones where you move, silently, strategically, while the rest of the room is still playing catch-up. That's how I became the owner of Marcellinos. Not through headlines. Not by flashing a platinum card. Not even through luck. But through quiet, deliberate positioning, the kind that takes years to play out and seconds to stun a room. The lead. It started with an email. Not some earth-shattering investor memo or private invitation. Just a mundane BCC chain from a contact I barely remembered. Cassandra Liu, former COO at a fintech I once helped consult during their automation migration. Her email read, "Looking for soft capital inquiries. Group evaluating equity dilution for one of our hospitality assets. Discretion required. Let me know if interested." Most people would have ignored it. I almost did, but something about it nagged at me. I replied with one word. Details? The response came the next morning, a 2-page memo attached, with one line that jumped out like a fire alarm. Asset, Marcellinos, downtown flagship. I blinked twice. Marcellinos? The same place I once couldn't afford to eat at? The same place my family thought I didn't belong in? My chest tightened, not with greed, not even ambition. It was something else. The numbers game. The memo was clear. Marcellinos' parent group, Virtus Table, was evaluating a quiet cash infusion to expand operations and renovate 2 aging flagship locations. But here was the key detail most people would have missed. Preferably seeking silent partners to avoid operational disruption. That was my door. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted equity.
Control.
Position. I responded with a non-disclosure request and 3 follow-up questions, all disguised as technical due diligence. What percentage of equity is on the table? Are current partners open to transfer of board voting rights under a non-interference clause? How soon is capital needed? By the end of the week, I was on a call with Cassandra, along with a senior partner from Virtus. I played it cool. Low voice. Measured tone. I used the phrase quiet capital 5 times. And when they asked if I had hospitality experience, I said, enough to know which metrics matter, and enough to stay out of the chef's way. That was all they needed to hear. The deal. Within 2 weeks, we were negotiating. The offering? 18% equity at a $9 million valuation. But that wasn't the prize. The prize was in the clause I slid in. Option to acquire additional 12% within 18 months, exercisable at current valuation, contingent on performance. Translation. If Marcellinos hit its performance goals, I could purchase more equity at the same price, regardless of future valuation. Why did they agree? Because they needed capital fast. And I promised full silence, no interference, and capital in 10 days. I wired it in 5. Within 6 months, the restaurant outperformed its targets. In fact, it smashed them. Not because I touched operations, but because I boosted their back-end systems with tools my software company already owned. I gave them analytics dashboards they didn't know they needed. Menu optimization based on spend velocity. Payroll restructuring tools. Loyalty heat maps. Quiet upgrades. I didn't show up with a team of consultants. I gave them keys and let them drive. By the end of that year, I owned 30% of Marcellinos. The largest single stakeholder. Silent, yes. But silent doesn't mean invisible. The night I walked in differently. When I walked into Marcellinos for my dad's birthday, dressed in that navy suit, confident but still grounded, I didn't walk in to show off. I walked in to reclaim a space that once told me I didn't belong. The manager greeted me with, "Mr. Carter, welcome back." The staff knew not to fuss, just to deliver excellence. That moment, it wasn't for revenge. It was for closure. And it was earned. Why? I chose silence. People often ask, why didn't you announce it? Why didn't you make it public? The truth? Because I learned something from my earliest years in business, especially from the Marcus situation. Power is quieter than people think. The loudest person in the room usually has the least to lose. Real power is in the ability to change a room without needing to say a word. To sign the front of the check, not just the back. To own without needing to control. I didn't want to run a restaurant. I wanted to own a space that told stories like mine. Stories about showing up when no one expects you to. About becoming what you were never allowed to dream. Rewriting the story. After the birthday dinner, my mother called me a few days later. She sounded different, softer. More curious than critical.
I've been thinking, she said.
About how wrong I was. How much I didn't see. I stayed silent. She continued. I thought you were lost. You weren't. You were just on a different road. I didn't rub it in. Didn't gloat.
Didn't say I told you so.
I simply said, it's okay. Because it was. Behind the curtain. A few weeks later, I visited the restaurant during a quiet mid-afternoon lull. No guests. Just a few staff resetting the tables. Antonio, the maitre d', met me at the entrance. Care for a walkthrough? He asked. I nodded.
He showed me the upgrades.
The kitchen expansions. The new tech terminals. And then he led me to the wine cellar, the same one we'd used to coordinate the dessert surprise during my dad's dinner. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note from the executive chef. You never interrupted the rhythm. That's rare in an owner. Thank you for letting us dance. I stood there, in a cellar worth hundreds of thousands in rare vintages, feeling something I hadn't in years. Stillness. Not pride. Not relief. Just peace. Legacy in silence. They say legacy is what you leave behind when you're gone. But I've come to believe something else. Legacy is built in the moments you don't post about. The things you build that speak even when you're not in the room. Marcellino's isn't just a restaurant anymore. It's a quiet chapter of my story. It's the answer to a question my mother never asked, but always implied. What makes you think you can make it? And now, without saying a word, I've answered her. You can spend your whole life trying to prove something to your family, and then one day realize they were never your audience to begin with. After the dinner at Marcellino's, things with my family didn't go back to normal. They went somewhere else. Somewhere new. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere uneasy. Because the moment people realize you've outgrown the role they cast you in, they don't always cheer. Sometimes they retreat. The space between us. I didn't expect balloons and confetti. But I also didn't expect the silence that followed. No messages from my cousins. No follow-up from my sister. No, let's catch up from my mom. Not right away. Instead, there was distance. A kind of awkward recalibration, like they were trying to figure out where I now fit in the family narrative. Because I had changed, that much was clear.
But so had they.
They didn't see me as the black sheep anymore. They saw me as something else. And that scared them. Sunday dinner, that wasn't the same. 2 weeks after the birthday dinner, I got invited to Sunday dinner at my parents' place. It was the first time in over a year. I accepted, partly because I was curious, partly because I owed it to myself to stop avoiding places just because they reminded me of who I used to be. When I walked in, the air felt different. There were more questions than greetings. So, what exactly do you do now? My uncle asked mid-salad. I run a holding company, I said. We oversee 3 ventures: tech, hospitality, and logistics. Blank stares. Like an entrepreneur? Someone offered. Sure, I nodded. Then silence again. Because the truth was, they didn't know how to relate to me anymore. Not because I was flashy. Not because I changed. But because their idea of success had a ceiling. And I had quietly walked through it. My sister's question. After dinner, as I helped clear the plates, Julia pulled me aside. Do you ever feel like weird about all this? All what? I asked. You know, money, status, the way everyone treats you now. I paused. Sometimes. But not for the reasons you think. She looked at me, confused. I feel weird, I continued, because it took money for some people to start listening to me. Not because I needed to be validated, but because I realized how conditional their respect really was. Julia nodded slowly. I never stopped believing in you, she said. I smiled. I know. You were one of the few. Then she hesitated. But Mom, she's trying, you know? She's just processing. I didn't respond right away. Because I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. What they never knew. They never saw me lose 12 pounds in a month because I was too broke to eat right. They never saw the 3 a.m. anxiety spirals when payroll was due and the bank account was almost empty. They never saw me cry in a public restroom after losing a contract I spent 5 months negotiating. They didn't see the grind, the grit, the grief of building something when no one clapped. Because I didn't let them. I didn't share the worst days. I barely shared the best ones. And that silence became a gap too wide to bridge overnight. The phone call I'll never forget. A week later, Mom called me. This time not to ask about work. She asked about me. How are you really? The question caught me off guard. I told her the truth. I'm good. Tired. Fulfilled mostly. Lonely sometimes. She was quiet. Then she said, I wish I'd asked that more.
I didn't say anything.
I didn't have to. Because for the first time, she was trying to see me, not manage me, not critique me, not fix me. Just see me. The realization. After the call, I sat in my office and looked around. It was a beautiful space now, minimalist, elegant, warm. I had a framed photo on the shelf of my team's first offsite retreat. I had my first product spec pinned in a shadow box on the wall. But the thing that caught my eye was the old whiteboard. I hadn't erased it, just turned it around. And on the back, in my own faded handwriting. One day, they'll ask how you did it. But that day hadn't come. Because the truth is, they didn't really want to know how. Not in detail. Not in full. Because if they did, they'd have to admit they were wrong.
About me.
About what's possible. About everything. When family sees you differently. When you come from a family where safety is the only currency, risk makes you dangerous. And once you succeed, you don't become the hero. You become the exception. An outlier. A glitch in the system. Because if they admit you were right, they have to question everything they chose not to do. Every dream they gave up. Every realistic decision that came from fear, not desire. That's the weight of being the first. Not just the first to make money, but the first to dream out loud and follow through. The price of growth. Here's what no one tells you about leveling up. You don't just outgrow jobs or cities. You sometimes outgrow people, including family. Not because you're better, but because you've changed languages. You speak in concepts like time value, leverage, scale. They speak in mortgages, job titles, and good enough. You try to share your wins, and they hear arrogance. You try to show humility, and they assume you're hiding something. It's not their fault. They're speaking from their lens. But you have to decide if you're going to keep shrinking just so they can stay comfortable, or if you're willing to keep growing, even when it gets lonely. What the family didn't know. They didn't know I used to sleep with my laptop open, afraid the server would crash overnight. They didn't know I'd once been so broke, I fixed a broken chair with duct tape and called it an ergonomic upgrade. They didn't know how many nights I spent talking myself out of quitting. But most of all, they didn't know that none of the money mattered, not at first. What mattered was being free. Free to build. Free to think. Free to be me, without their version of success haunting every step. The shift. In time, things softened. My cousin started asking real questions. Julia sent me startup articles with "thought this might interest you" in the subject line. Even my mom began asking about the business, carefully but earnestly. And my dad? He just listened more. There was no grand apology. No teary, we were wrong. But there was presence. And sometimes that's enough. The decision. I used to think I wanted full validation. Now I know I just wanted peace. And the only way I found it was by building something that spoke louder than their doubt. Something they couldn't ignore. Not because it shouted, but because it lasted. There's a moment, if you're lucky, when your life clicks into place. Not because you arrived, but because you realize. You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. The applause doesn't matter. The recognition doesn't matter. Even the misunderstanding stops mattering. Because for the first time, you understand yourself. And that moment came for me 6 weeks after the dinner at Marcellino's, on a random Tuesday, when I finally decided to tell the truth. The whole truth. It started with a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual envelope. My father handed it to me while we were sitting outside his garage, sipping black coffee and watching my niece play on the driveway. "I found this in a drawer," he said. "You might want to read it." I opened it slowly. Inside, a letter I had written to myself 5 years ago. I had no memory of ever leaving it behind. The handwriting was messy. The paper creased. But the words burned into me. Asterisk, you don't need them to understand. Just keep building. One day, this pain will be your proof. Asterisk. My chest tightened. It was like hearing from a younger version of myself, one who didn't know how it would turn out, one who only had faith, grit, and that tiny flicker of belief. My dad watched me read it. "That's yours?" he asked. I nodded. I kept it. Didn't mean to. I just thought it mattered. Then he added something I wasn't ready for. "I wish I'd asked more questions. Sooner." That moment? That was the real reveal. Not the one at dinner. Not the one with champagne and titles. But this one, humble, honest, and finally open. The family gathering that changed everything. A few days later, my sister texted, "Mom wants to host a family dinner. No agenda. Just us. You in?" I hesitated. But I said yes. It was held at my parents' house, the same one I grew up in. The one where I first learned how small the world could feel when no one believed in big dreams. But this time, it felt lighter. The food was simple. The mood relaxed. No tension, no judgment. Then, after dessert, my mother stood up and tapped a glass with a spoon. Not loudly, just enough. Everyone fell quiet. She looked at me. "Can I say something?" she asked. I nodded. She took a breath. "I don't always get things right, especially with you. I spent years thinking safety was the same as love. That protecting you from disappointment meant guiding you towards something safe, something familiar. But I see now you didn't need a map. You needed space. And I should have trusted you to find your own way." I didn't expect emotion to rise like it did, but it did. She wiped her eyes quickly and laughed through it. "Don't get used to this. I'm still me." The whole table laughed. Then she looked at me again. "I'm proud of you. Not because you made money, but because you kept going when no one understood." And in that moment, everything I'd ever needed from her was given. Without a fight. Without a breakdown. Just given. The true reveal. After dinner, my cousins pulled me aside. They were different now, not starstruck, but engaged. "Be honest," one of them asked. "Did you plan the whole thing? The dinner reveal? The staff calling you Mr. Carter?" I smiled. "I didn't plan the moment," I said. "But I made sure I was ready for it." They nodded, impressed. Then another cousin said, "You've changed." I thought about that for a moment. "No," I replied. "I've just become more of who I was always trying to be." And that's when it hit me. This was never about revenge. It was about alignment. Bringing the outside reality in sync with the inner truth I'd carried for years. The truth they didn't want to see until it became too loud to ignore. Closure isn't loud. There was no viral post. No announcement. No press release saying, "The family now respects him." It just shifted. Slowly. Gently. Quietly. My father started asking questions about my business, not to judge, but to understand. My mother started forwarding me articles about startups with little thought-of-you notes. Julia texted me randomly one morning, "You should write a book." Maybe one day I will. But for now, I just breathe. One last visit to Marcellino's. I went back one evening, alone. No reservation. Didn't need one. Antonio greeted me with the same smooth charm. "Mr. Carter, your usual table." "Not tonight," I said. "Just the bar." I sat quietly, sipping a dark espresso, watching a family of 5 celebrate something at a booth in the corner. The dad was wearing a borrowed blazer. The mom looked like she'd splurged on the dress. The teenager looked around nervously, like he didn't belong. And I saw myself in him. I paid their bill quietly, left a note with the server. You belong anywhere you work hard enough to reach. And I walked out, quietly with peace. Legacy is built in silence. I used to think power meant proving people wrong. Now I know power is the ability to forgive them anyway, to rise above the version of you they never took the time to understand, to love them even when they only started loving the results. That's legacy, not wealth, not ownership, not even applause,
But peace.
and knowing you never needed permission to begin with. The quiet room. In my home office, there's a small framed photo of that dinner at Marcellino's. Not because it was the moment they finally saw me, but because it was the moment I stopped needing them to. Underneath the frame is a quote I had engraved. A quote from that old whiteboard. Show them you were right. And next to it, a new one. Then move on, you have nothing left to prove.